gospel reading for this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew. This is the culmination of Jesus' teaching prior to his arrest and his execution. This is the last public teaching. He will still gather with his disciples in the events of preparing for his Last Supper and his time in the garden are yet to be narrated, but this is the last public event of Jesus prior to his arrest. And this is the final teaching in what is a collection of teachings at that moment. Listen for what the Spirit is saying to us this day. Jesus said, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, 'Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me.' Then he will say to those at his left hand, 'You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they will answer, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?' Then he will answer them, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.' And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
At the church that I served in Raleigh, North Carolina, we had a small group of neighborhood congregations that got together to do certain things. We had an Easter sunrise service, a community Thanksgiving service, and we also did a bit of local mission. And so the pastors from these churches would get together from time to time to plan these events and share lunch. And over the years, I got to be friends with some of them, got to know them pretty well, so that we would share things with one another that had nothing to do with the events that we were planning. We would discuss opinions on issues. We would whine about our congregations. We would share advice on different issues, that sort of thing. And one time when we were gathered together, the subject of funerals came up. And Bob, the pastor at the Baptist church just down the street a ways, said to me something along the lines of, "I've always found it very difficult to do a funeral for someone I know isn't saved." Now, that startled me a bit. We Presbyterians tend to leave that sort of thing to God. John Calvin even wrote about what he called the visible and the invisible church. And Calvin says that the invisible church is the elect, those that are saved, and only God knows who's in that church. And according to Calvin, even someone who's an outstanding pillar in their visible congregation could possibly not be a member in the invisible church. Now, I don't know if it's because I grew up in this tradition, this Presbyterian tradition, or it's just the way I'm inclined, but I've never spent much time thinking about who is or who isn't saved. But certainly that's not the case for a lot of other people. I remember quite vividly a real argument that I got in with my best friend when I was about 10 years old over his insistence that no Jews got to go to heaven. Now my objection to his stance was not really rooted in any great scriptural knowledge or knowledge of theology. It just seemed wrong to me. But it is easy to see where my friend and my Baptist colleague get this notion of those who are saved and those who are not. There are plenty of places in the Bible that do speak of salvation coming only through Jesus. And a lot of people have worked out some pretty rigid formula. Confess Jesus as Lord and you are saved. Others insist that you also have to be born again before you can be saved. But as much as it may trouble some of the biblical literalists out there in the world, the fact is that the Bible is not terribly consistent on this issue. And today's reading may just be a good case in point. As I noted, this is the last public teaching of Jesus that we heard prior to his arrest. And unlike the teachings that preceded, it's not a parable. It seems to be a description of some sort of judgment that occurs at the end of the age, at the end of time. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Now the difficulty with this passage is figuring out exactly who Jesus is talking about. Who gets judged in this passage? Now our reading says all the nations, and so that might seem to be just talking about everybody. But the problem is that the Greek word used here is ethnos. You can hear our word ethnic in that.